and Johnson.
I was wondering, could you get someone to have a look at my phone? The line always seems to go fuzzy when I ring my daughter in Kent. You can't do anything till after the weekend. Oh, dear.
Replacing the country's old telephone system with a modern digital network is an immense job that'll take time to complete. But we're working on it, right round the clock.
I know. You sound like you're just down the road. Die. You wait all weekend, and what happens? It goes right all by itself.
British Telecom, it's you we answer to.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
First bite into real milk chocolate,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
then crunch into light crispy rice.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Chew, chew, chew the caramel toffee in.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Wafer and fondant too.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
PGL Conservatories, custom designed for your home with up to 30% discount. Phone Newmarket 750-142.
More people buy Amstrad computers than any other make. Take the PC 1512. Thomas can work at home on it. And his kids can play games on it. Richard went for the PC 1640 with enhanced graphics, priced so that almost any business can afford one. Or more than one. And now there's the Amstrad Portable PC. Use it in the office, or on the move, or to send information back to the office from home via the phone. It means a lot less legwork. Amstrad industry standard computers. Now there's a computer for every Tom, Dick, and Harriet.
Anglia entertainment right through Tuesday night. At 12:35, drama, Prisoner Cell Block H. Hear the hits from the States, America's Top 10 at 1:30. Comedy tonight, a bundle of laughs at 2 a.m. Return to Eden at 2:30 as Stephanie fights to save her marriage. At 3:30, the Poseidon Files in pursuit of the giant humpback. And at 4:30, Alfred Hitchcock presents Martin Sheen as the method actor. Entertainment right through Tuesday night on Anglia.
And at 11:35 tonight here on Anglia, there's sport. So boxing fans, stay tuned. But now, David Bellamy presents a survival special, Paradise Ploughed.
Below me lies the largest area of primeval landscape wilderness left anywhere in the British Isles. Wonderful, undulating, soggy blanket bog. Now, the condition for the formation of this particular type of bog occurs so rarely that we only find it in isolated pockets across the earth. It's hard to believe that a landscape as alien as this can be found anywhere in Britain. In fact, most people are hardly aware of its existence, as it lies in the north of Scotland near John O'Groats, far from all our major cities. The two districts of Caithness and Sutherland possess around 1/10 of the total world's blanket bog. These boglands are concentrated in a region known as the Flow Country, a vast and wild expanse covering over 1,500 square miles. This haunting landscape and its wildlife are now under threat as a forestry company ploughs up the peat to plant thousands of trees. Already, over 120 square miles have been planted. Fountain Forestry, the company involved, could double the area of forest cover during the next 10 years to over 240 square miles. Conservationists believe that this whole area should be protected, while of course the foresters say that they'll be turning a wasteland into a productive resource. And what I'm going to try and do is find whether there's any area of compromise, or whether, you know, those two opinions are so poles apart that there is no solution at all. Opinions on both sides are so strong that foresters and conservationists have reached stalemate. Well, I must say I walked over much of this land about 30 years ago, and I've just flown over it. I'm pretty appalled. I mean, there is very, very few areas where you can look now and you can't either see a plough line or forestry creeping in.
Well, I'm not convinced, firstly, that there's anything wrong with forestry in this area. The conservation body, in my view, are the ones that are taking the really polarised view. We're prepared to talk about reducing planting in certain parts of this area, not others. But what we're actually faced with is that we must just stop planting, and stop planting right away. And it's very difficult for us to come to a compromise in that sort of situation.
Conservationists believe that further destruction will be a major tragedy. OK, Roy, I reckon I can speak for the bogs, but what about the birds? How important is the flow country?
Absolutely unique, and that's why there's so much row. This is our sort of tundra, the kind of southern extremity of the tundra, a super wet bog, huge, and covered in breeding waders and wildfowl. It's the most important area in Britain for birds like the greenshank, the golden plover, the dunlin, the black-throated diver, and here they're all together.
The black-throated diver rarely breeds in Britain, for it is a bird of the Arctic, but these flow country lochs resemble its northern tundra habitat. 30 pairs nest here during the summer, laying their eggs in mossy depressions close beside the water, often on small islands. The black-throated diver is a fishing bird and prefers to nest by larger lochs. But the bird which is most strongly attracted to the wet bogland is a wader called the dunlin, which breeds beside peat pools in the heart of the flow country. Over 40% of the British dunlin population nests here in the summer. So the area is becoming increasingly important as suitable wetlands elsewhere are drained. Like many moorland birds, dunlin needs large feeding territories and often nest as far as a mile apart. The pools are a vital ingredient because they supply food such as flies and beetles. But how does a bog come about in the first place? The lifeblood of any bog is rain, lots of it. The north of Scotland lies directly in the path of moisture-laden air streams that sweep in from the Atlantic. Locals say that hereabouts it rains 2 days out of 3. Scottish bogs differ from those found in most other parts of the world because they don't have heavy snow cover or permafrost. These are 2 reasons why the bogs are so unique. Constant waterlogging kills most plants. but there are some which positively thrive under such conditions. Certain mosses. Now you might think that moss is pretty unimportant, uninteresting stuff, all growing, sticking out of walls and on the trunks of trees and things. But hereabouts, well, moss covers, it blankets this entire landscape. And not only does it do that, but it forms its own landscape features. I'm standing on top of a gigantic dome, what, all 3 hectares in extent, sticking up out of this rather flat area. And it's all here because of one sort of moss, sphagnum, the bog moss. Let me get some. Now, what have I got? About 25 moss plants there, and if I squeeze them, all the water comes pouring out because the bog moss sphagnum can hold at least 20 times its own weight of water. And the reason it can do that is because of the structure of its little leaves. Under the microscope, you can see that each leaf consists of 2 types of cells. There are narrow green cells, and between them are larger cells which hold water. This special structure means that the leaves carry their own water reservoirs up with them, so the moss never dries out. Mosses have got very weak stems and cannot stand up on their own, so they always grow in thick clumps. In these swelling hummocks and dense carpets, the stems are tightly packed together and so support each other. Look closely and you can see how beautiful they are. The mosses produce waste chemicals that help make the bog acid and hostile to other plants. But the bog mosses themselves are well adapted to the harsh environment they create. Now, because of the water-holding capacity of the moss and the fact that it's always raining hereabouts, the whole landscape is saturated. There we go. You can get me fingers. I'm into water already, but it's nice and warm, heated up by the rays of the sun. Poke it down further, and it really is freezing cold. You see, the sun's rays can't get down there, and neither can the oxygen-rich air, because it's sealed off by the moss and the water. And so when the moss and the other plants die, they don't decay away, they just stay put and form layer after layer of peat. And that's exactly what I'm walking on, layer upon layer of dead plant material, peat, covered with a thin layer of living moss at the surface. Now the peat is so super saturated with water that the rain just can't drain away down through it. So all the water movement is in the surface layers, and so it's rather like walking about on a bowl of very sloppy porridge. One of the most beautiful and astounding features of these bogs are the open pool areas full of black water. The dew lochans. Now there's still an awful lot of discussion as to exactly how they come about. One group of people say they're part of the natural growth process. You see, as the bog mosses grow in big hummocks, then the hollows in between just fill up with water, while others say that as the bog heaves itself up growing, well, tensions are set up in the living skin and they split and tear, forming these wonderful patterned pools. But whichever way it is, they are unique features of the flow country. It's the sheer size of the Scottish flows that has given rise to such a diversity of pool systems. Damage to the bog at any point may disturb the delicate water balance that has allowed the pools to evolve. These pools in turn harbour some unusual creatures. This caddisfly larva builds its protective tube out of the outer stem of bogby, a common aquatic plant. It was once thought that this diving beetle was extinct in Britain, but in 1986 it was rediscovered in the flows. Who knows what else there may be in these pools? Peat bogs are places all people should tread with caution. It looks safe enough, doesn't it? But just you watch. Bog hole in one. But there are many creatures which are at home on this quaking ground, particularly those that can fly. About 60 pairs of Arctic skua arrive in late April to nest near these pools. They spend most of the year at sea, only coming ashore to breed. Most nest in the Arctic, and only a handful venture south to the British mainland. Another group equally well adapted to living on the wet bogland are the carnivorous plants. And tucked in here we got the butterwort with its violet flower, hence its other name, the bog violet. But I tell you, this violet's a murderer. This rosette of leaves looks harmless enough, unless you happen to be an insect. Every leaf is furnished with thousands of sticky glands. Once an insect lands on these, escape is virtually impossible. Without doubt, the best known of all the carnivorous plants are the sundews, and we got 3 different sorts here, each growing in their own place in relation to the water table. Now, high and drier up here on the hummock, there's the round-leaf sundew. Lower down, where it's somewhat damper, the great sundew. And then the long-leaf sundew, close beside the water where it's always wet. The sundew's halo of droplets glistens in the sun. Insects attracted to the sticky nectar-like drops are trapped. The plant secretes enzymes which gradually digest the victim. Carnivorous plants do so well here because they obtain nutrients such as nitrogen from the bodies of the insects they consume. Plants of the peat bog have to make do with a poor supply of nutrients. The peat, however, is a rich resource for the local people. Fuel. Crofters cut and dry peat at traditional sites, mainly around the edge of the flows. But as they burn the peat, I wonder how many of them realise they're burning a record of the past. Foresters also cut peat when they plant trees. Part of their argument for planting is that they're only replacing natural pine forest which was destroyed by man 3,000 years ago. But what are the facts? Oh, excuse me a moment, I'm reaching back into history. You see, a peat bog is a gigantic repository of historical fact, and as it grows so slowly, I've gone now out a metre, and that's around 2,000 years. So let's see what was growing back then. And I bring up the peat, and it's not an amorphous mass, but all fibrous and full of the fibres of bog cotton and deer sedge and odd bits of heather, and of course all those sphagnum leaves. So really the vegetation around here hasn't changed for all that time. But how did it all start? What was growing here not 2 but 7,000 years ago? Now, on the bottom of my boring rod, I've got a chamber, okay? And I'll open the chamber and take a sample of peat, a time capsule of information from 7,000 years ago. And if I can get it up, oh, tough stuff, history. Ray made it. Now, the exciting thing is what's inside. We know we've been down to the bottom, and open it comes. Now, what have we got? Alright, now at the top it really very, very little change. Still that fibrous peat full of sphagnum leaves and bog cotton. But down the bottom it really does change quite dramatically. Nice dark peat. It's not really peat at all because it's full of grit, and yeah, you can hear it between my teeth. You see, it was mineral soil, and there, growing in that mineral soil, the remains of birchwood. You see, so 7,000 years ago, the bog started its life as a birchwood. Rarely you also find preserved pine stumps at the bottom of the peat, but they, along with the birch trees, were wiped out by the rapid growth of the bog 6,000 years ago. No trees have grown here naturally since. The majority of the peatlands are so poor they can support very little apart from light grazing, except of course when it comes to wildlife. Britain's smallest falcon, the merlin, loves the undisturbed flow country. The population of merlins has remained fairly constant because here land use is traditional. Throughout the rest of Britain, the bird has declined as farming has become more intensive. The pair return to the same nest site, usually in deep heather, from their lowland wintering grounds in April. Only the female tends the young and feeds them with food provided by the male. Already the young are quite a handful for their mother as they compete for food. Like many other moorland predators, the merlin needs a large hunting range as its prey, meadow pipits and skylarks, are thin on the ground. The chicks wait until the female brings in the kill. Today, as forestry encroaches on the wide open spaces, there is less room for the merlins. They can't compete with forest predators like sparrowhawks. Other rare birds of the open country are being forced out too, including waders such as the greenshank. Surely the birds, the greenshank and the golden plover, are here because of the wide open spaces. So once you stick all your trees up, they're just going to disappear.
Well, that'd be the case if we were planting the whole area. Greenshanks certainly like the wetter moorland areas, and although greenshanks will continue to nest and live in the forest at this stage, up to 5 or 10 years old, once it becomes a true forest, then there isn't space for a moorland bird. But in this area generally, we'll never plant up anything like the whole area. Now there's a large chunk of open ground there that's very good greenshank habitat. That's where the greenshanks are at the moment. You don't normally find greenshank on this type of hill. We have been rather selective in the ground we've planted.
It is this special community of open country birds which is most at risk from forestry. Over 66% of the British greenshank population breeds in the Scottish flows. That's about 630 pairs. Conservationists estimate that already 130 pairs of greenshanks have been lost because of the new forests. Greenshanks nest on drier ground, but rely on the pools and lochs for beetles, dragonfly larvae and other insects. They need large territories to support themselves and their young. The loss of vital pools may make a whole area useless for raising a family. But does forestry really threaten the pool systems which are so vital for wildlife like the greenshank? Okay, so I'm a conservationist standing up here with you before, the forest has gone in, and I say, which bit of this terrain do you want? Which would you choose?
Well, we very definitely want this area on this side of the hill where the soils are drier, not the true bog systems that we see on the nature reserve.
So the deep peat really is outside what you want?
Yes, the deep, very wet, boggy peat is far from an ideal forestry site.
So all the wonderful pattern bits and all the dooblockens I've seen flying over the top, really you wouldn't want to put trees on it?
No, and we haven't. In fact, we actually can't. Even if we wanted to, we would lose our equipment, our ploughing equipment would just sink and disappear, and that would be the end of it.
In fact, Fountain Forestry's ploughs appear to have no problem in slicing through wet peat. The plough lines often go right up to the edge of the pools. Only the main pool systems remain untouched. At first sight it looks as if most of the deep pools will survive, but as the plough lines are there to drain water from the ground, the pools will eventually dry out. Mosses and other bog plants will disappear and the bog will slowly die.
So it took years and years to wake people up, and as you know, you can't see it from the road. You need to go up in the sky to see the extent of this damage. Well, we're certain it's the size of it is important for the birds, and the problem here is that you can put a plough in here and you can go for miles and miles and miles, and my dread is that it will be wall-to-wall forestry for nearly 50 miles, and that should never be allowed to happen.
No matter what kind of home you live in, you can benefit from a remarkably efficient invention. A home heating system that's flexible enough to meet your needs exactly, yet can cost as little as £569 for a one-bedroom flat. It's a heating system that uses less than half-price electricity to give you continuous, controllable warmth and a whole tank full of piping hot water. It's not central heating, it's total heating. It runs only on electricity. Heat Electric, energy for life.
Come to Bride on a Budget for beautiful bridal gowns, bridesmaids' dresses and accessories at low, low prices. Bride on a Budget, Wyndham.
As Sunday newspapers have evolved, we've seen every style, from the probing investigative to the downright sensational. But for those who value sharp, concise, and intelligent writing, the Sunday Telegraph is the natural selection.
Do you feel all right? Do you feel all right? Senatogen, the favorite family of vitamins.
When the Forestry Commission first tried to plant trees in the Flow Country 60 years ago, the problems of waterlogging and poor soil made it virtually impossible. But the introduction of a new double plough 10 years ago changed all this. Well, it was the Commission's experiments here at Strathy that really opened up the flows to forestry. Now, what were the problems?
The big problem here was that Sitka spruce wouldn't grow on these peats without some nitrogen. So we set up this experiment here to look at putting nitrogen into Sitka spruce. And it certainly did grow, but we had to put an awful lot of nitrogen onto it. But as part of this experiment, we actually mixed in some Sitka spruce with lodgepole pine. And this was, nobody expected very much of this, but in the end it's turned out to be the big success.
By 1980, planting techniques had come on so far that Fountain Forestry was able to move into the Flow Country where land was available at a low price. The pace and scale of afforestation during the 80s took conservation bodies completely by surprise. Using the basis of your research, what do you reckon the average yields are going to be?
Average yield class here from the Sitka spruce is going to be about 12, and that's very close to the national average for conifers. The whole British forestry really is an experiment, and every time we've gone and planted trees we've taken a risk. And obviously things could go wrong here. The one big imponderable is the wind, and one day these trees will blow over. Now, if they make it to 40, then we'll probably have made quite a bit of money. If they blew over at 30, then we wouldn't.
Foresters point to the success of early plantations in the more sheltered valleys as proof that trees will do well here. But this is one of the windiest parts of the country. All foresters dread the winter gales which can devastate plantations even in the best sites. Many critics believe that here we are attempting to grow trees beyond the limits of their natural range, and it will never produce quality timber. But it would be wrong to give the impression that forestry is all bad for wildlife. Why, it provides a habitat for woodland birds, and in they come. But of course, it's very often birds which are common in other parts of Britain, like chaffinch and coaltip. Now, we may get lucky and, crossbill and siskin, birds which love living in amongst the conifers, will arrive upon the scene. And another thing which changes, especially on the edge of young plantations like this, is we may get a great plague of small mammals like short-tailed voles, and there's the little short tail. Now, as their population goes up, of course, so does the population of the predators, like hen harrier and short-eared owls, and they really must be looked on as a plus. Unless, of course, you happen to be a short-tailed vole. Short-eared owls have always nested in the flow country, but originally their nests were few and far between. Now the young forestry plantations are teeming with voles, and the owls are multiplying. For the first 10 days of life, the owlets are blind. The male advertises the boundaries of the nesting territory by clapping his wings beneath him. Voles are so thick on the ground in this plantation that it supports no less than 5 pairs of owls. The male does most of the hunting until the youngest owlets leave the nest. He usually sets out soon after sunrise. Hovering, he scans the ground before moving on. Though all goes well for the owls while the forest is still young, the situation changes once the trees are between 10 to 15 years old. The canopy begins to close over at this stage, and the ground vegetation will gradually die back, causing the vole population to fall. Then, as their food supply suddenly disappears, owl numbers will plummet. Even when this area is felled and replanted, the owls will probably never return. The forests also encourage other predators such as hooded crows which nest in the trees. These young crows are probably being fed, amongst other things, young waders such as greenshank and dunlin. Foxes also use forests for cover, and they may take the eggs and young of birds like the golden plover if they nest too close to the trees. But foresters dispute claims that moorland birds dislike breeding close beside the forest because of an increase in predators.
But there's no real evidence to show that the increased predation of important birds, like the hen harrier, will substantially affect the populations of birds like, say, the greenshank. They succeed with predation in Scandinavia.
I'm told by the forestry people that greenshank love living in forested bogs in Scandinavia. Well, forest is going to be here.
Totally different forest. What we're talking about there is the willow and birch scrub up on the tundra. Totally different. There they will accept. You know, I'm sure you've seen it. It's just a bush here and a kind of couple bushes over there. Not row after row of Sitka spruce. There's no way they can nest in that sort of country.
Hen harriers hunt songbirds such as meadow pipits and skylarks. During the breeding season, the male passes food to the female in a spectacular aerial somersault. Like most birds of prey, he does all the hunting while the young are still in the nest, and it is the female who brings food to the chicks. She broods them continuously for the first week, except when she leaves the nest to take food from the male. Towards the end of the 19th century, hen harriers were virtually wiped out in mainland Britain by gamekeepers who blamed them for the loss of grouse chicks. But during the Second World War, the hen harriers recolonised the mainland from Orkney. The Flow country was an important stepping stone for these spectacular birds. Hen harriers nest only in long heather on open ground, but they continue to use their traditional nest sites even when surrounded by young conifers. But they are not woodland birds, and they too will move away as the forest matures. Predators directly threaten some birds, but it is the mere presence of trees that may drive others away. Over 150 pairs of red-throated divers arrive in April to breed in the flows. They are truly graceful in water, but almost clumsy when they come ashore to breed. Above all, they need solitude. Foresters suggest that the diver's need for isolation is an argument in favour of planting trees around locks.
The key with divers is isolation and quiet. And one of the best ways to produce that is to plant some trees around them, so long as we don't plant the trees too close. And we recognise this. So it's lock-ins like this that would be a possible diver nesting site. At the moment may well be too open. But once the trees get up and allow them more apparent seclusion, I think there's more likelihood of success of nesting.
Well, that also just doesn't work out, because the problem is that we know that divers need long takeoffs. So they're not very good at flying. They're brilliant at swimming, but not very good at flying, so they need a long takeoff. So surrounded by tall trees or trees is not what they're looking for. So again, the risk is, and it's a very serious risk, that they're not going to stay there.
The divers have to make frequent flights to larger lochs or the sea to bring in fish. The small pools don't hold sufficient food to feed the young. This chick is about a fortnight old and swims around the adult begging for food. Already it has a voracious appetite for fish. Sadly, numbers of both red and black-throated divers are falling in the area. Disturbance of one sort or another, such as new forestry roads, has meant that only a very low proportion of diver chicks fledge successfully. Also, predators may be taking the eggs. By September, they'll leave the lochs and return to their wintering grounds on the Atlantic and North Sea coasts. By this time, the young birds will be capable of strong flight, especially if the parent bird continues to bring such generous portions to its offspring.
The vast majority of the people who've ever seen the great flow country have done so from this railway track, which wobbles its way up across Caithness and Sutherland. And if you want to have that experience, then you better be quick, because much of the land on either side of the track has already been planted up with trees. And in years to come, this train will run through a green tunnel. I'd say a green tunnel of gloom. Other people would say a green tunnel of prosperity and joy. But why has it happened, and why has it happened so quickly? Well, the answer is incentive. You see, 70% of the cost of all the private forestry going on round here has been paid for by the good old British taxpayer, the likes of you and me. And to date, that bill has been more than £10 million.
Government policy encourages forestry by giving tax benefits to the investors who expect to make a great deal of money out of their plantations.
It must be very nice for the investors having the railway line here so they can come up and see their new plantation, and also very convenient for getting the workers in and taking the timber out. But why was the railway built here in the first place? I mean, they could have put it the direct route along the coast, linking up all the towns and villages. But no, instead, they put it the real long route going through this wilderness of the flow country. Well, again, the answer was incentive. You see, the great estates were here, and they wanted the railway line so they could build all their lodges and develop a new tourist industry.
But this part of the tourist industry is now running down. In contrast to the incentives for private forestry, estates are actually penalised by the government as they have to pay rates on the numbers of grouse and deer shot. Many of the shooting lodges and hotels now stand empty and in need of repair.
But if I had come here 60 years ago, it really would have been buzzing with life, with servants and gillies and beaters and gamekeepers, and of course the visitors who came here to hunt and shoot the flows and to fish in this black loch. And you can see that already they've ploughed almost up to the edge of the lake. And soon, all I'll be able to see standing here are rows and rows of Sitka spruce and lodgepole pine radiating out into the distance. And as I stand here between these new plantations and this not-so-old house, I can't help thinking there must be a better way of revitalising the human economy of the flows. There must be a better way than just blanketing it all with conifers and sending the money down to those rich absentee investors of the south.
While red deer provides some income, it is not enough, and hard-pressed estate managers are forced to sell to forestry to boost their incomes. But most feel that private forestry swallows up vast tracts of land, leaving little room for mixed economies. They know it is no long-term solution.
If forestry move in, I believe that the little community we have here would be, it would more or less be a ghost town, because forestry don't employ very many people after the initial planting has taken place.
Fountain Forestry has brought 200 jobs to Caithness and Sutherland, but 2/3 of these are seasonal: planting, ploughing, road building and fencing. There are few new long-term jobs created. Keepers simply become forest rangers. Forestry may even adversely affect the traditional economies of the estates.
We've found that there's been quite a vast reduction in the number of deer, mostly stags, in this area, and probably in the whole of Sutherland over the last 25 years, due to a lot of ground, low ground, being fenced off by both private forestry and Forestry Commission. Deer, especially stags, have one area of the estate and one area of the country where they winter and one area where they summer. And they winter on the low ground. This has been blocked off due to private and Forestry Commission fencing. Deer then follow these fences, and some are shot inside the big blocks and some work their way down onto the arable ground, and deer on arable ground are classed as vermin. The rating system on an estate is quite severe actually, because you've got an estate is rated on number of deer and fish and grouse shot, whereas Forestry Commission and farmland at the moment are not rated.
Local estate owners and farmers too would hate to see the area lose its character. On the other hand, they resent being dictated to either by conservationists or foresters. If forestry stopped, land values would fall, and the local people would probably expect government compensation. Over 10,000 people come to fish in Sutherland and Caithness every year, and it is an important source of income. Fishing can also be affected by forestry. Ploughing often increases the erosion of peat and soil. The silt so produced can kill fish eggs developing in the riverbed downstream. Fortunately, precautions are being taken against siltation. There is, however, another much more insidious long-term threat. Evidence is accumulating that streams draining through maturing forests gradually become more acid. The acid releases aluminium from the soil, which is toxic to fish.
I've been keeper on this river for the last 50 years. Well, we're standing here, and it's a typical spawning stream for all the rivers in Sutherland. The fish come up here in November, and here they dig up the shingle, lay their eggs, and cover them over again to keep them free from invaders of any kind, and also from the very hard frost that we get some years. As the trees grow, they drink the water at that time, so that if it goes very low, there'll be a very great danger of all the eggs coming in view and the frost getting them and killing them off. It will be just a tragedy. If the fishing went down badly in this area, an awful lot of people in the area would be affected very much, because people come from all over the world to the hotels. They come not only for the fishing but for the scenery as well, and it would be a great shame if this beautiful countryside of ours was hidden among the trees.
The Flow country is an area of desolate beauty, which is attractive to many people, but is extremely vulnerable to change. So is there room for both trees and wildlife? If the Nature Conservancy Council surveys are plotted on a map, we can build up a picture of what they feel should be left untouched. The main peatland areas. The most important undamaged bog systems. The habitat most suitable for waders such as greenshank and dunlin. The river catchments most important for black-throated divers. Areas which contain merlin and other rare breeding birds. Altogether, these total 60% of Sutherland and Caithness. But the plantations are eating into the prime wildlife areas because both favour the flatter ground, which is cheaper to plough and to plant. To put it bluntly, foresters and conservationists want the same land. Fountain Forestry claims that it needs to increase the present area of trees over the next 10 years, so that the plantations will be large enough to keep the forest in rotation indefinitely. The Nature Conservancy feels it's duty-bound to preserve as much as possible of that which remains.
The IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has called for this area to be a World Heritage Site. And quite honestly, there isn't another area in mainland Britain that could better this area. We must choose. We have to choose now. If it goes, it's gone forever.
Now, if the Commission had known and had been told about the biological importance of the flow back all those years ago, would they have ever started this?
I think even if we knew what we knew now in 1977, I think things would have been very different up here.
And why do you go on, giving the private forestry the go-ahead for planting?
Well, the problem is that we've started, people have made an investment, and there's a lot of people working here, there's a lot of equipment committed. And whilst we would expect the rate of planting in the Flow country to go down, and there's very little chance of it staying at the level it has been in the last few years, to stop suddenly would be very, very disruptive.
We recognise that these remote areas of the Highlands need activity because there's a human population living here. The communities are important. And what we would like to see is the money that nowadays is just going to investors from the south investing in forestry here. We'd like to see it go to crofters, small farmers, fishing, hunting, tourism, wildlife, and to get the place in good shape. And along the straths, there's plenty of room for the right type of forestry. We're not against trees, we're against the wrong forestry in the wrong place for the wrong reasons.
It's my opinion that it's an act of total vandalism that this has ever been allowed to happen. But now it has, surely the government has got to make the decision on the economics of the case. Forestry on one hand, trees and jobs against the true value of the wildlife and wilderness of this resource. And remember, it's every British taxpayer that is in some way subsidising the destruction of this place. And for what? Mainly to put money into the pockets of already rich people, most of whom live nowhere near the Flow country at all. Surely it's time for rethinking that at least some of that subsidy should go into revitalising this local economy. For I believe we can have our trees in the right place, we can have our local jobs, and we can have our wildlife. And if we don't get the formula right, then Britain can never again hold up a head in facts and matters of international conservation.
For a free backup brochure about the conflicts in the Flow country, send a large stamped addressed envelope to Cathy Mason,